In June 2026, Gooseworx posted something on Bluesky that stopped a lot of people in their tracks. She said that the amazing Digital Circus had become way more trouble than it was worth, that it had gotten too much bigger than her, and that she could no longer keep her heart in it. And reading that, a lot of fans probably asked the same question. How did someone who spent years dreaming about making a living through animation end up saying that about the biggest project of her career? To understand the answer, you have to go back to the beginning, because the story of Gooseworx is one of the most interesting and human timelines in all of independent animation. On October 11th, 1994, Cooper Smith Goodwin was born in the United States, and she would eventually become known to millions of people online under a completely different name. Gooseworx is a trans woman who has spoken openly about her identity throughout her career, and she is also on the autism spectrum, something she has shared publicly as well. Before any of that became part of the public conversation, she was just a kid with a very specific set of passions: animation, music, musicals, weird things that most people would not know what to do with, and an intense and completely irrational fear of centipedes that would eventually make its way into one of her most famous characters. She grew up absorbing an eclectic mix of influences. In music, composers like Grant Kirkhope, who did the Banjo-Kazooie soundtracks, and Michael Giacchino, behind films like The Incredibles and Up, were reference points that shaped how she thought about music serving a story. In animation, she was drawn to Richard Williams, the mind behind Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and the studio Trigger, known for Kill la Kill, alongside more underground names like Felix Colgrave and Chris O'Neill. In horror and literature, she found Junji Ito, Harlan Ellison, and Hideaki Anno, the creator of Evangelion. That combination of playful, chaotic, and deeply unsettling would define her creative voice from the very beginning. Her favorite color is purple, and around 90% of her creative work, by her own admission, is inspired by dreams she has had. Around 2009, while she was trying to figure out how to turn her passion for animation into an actual career, Gooseworx started working at McDonald's, and she would stay there for approximately 5 years, using the job to pay rent while she kept working on her art on the side. She was eventually fired for repeatedly showing up late, which is one of those details that, in retrospect, feels almost too on the nose for someone who was clearly meant to be doing something else entirely. What makes this chapter of her life particularly interesting is what happened to that McDonald's much later. The real location where she worked ended up serving as direct inspiration for episode 4 of the amazing Digital Circus, the fast food episode where the restaurant is called Spudsies, and Gooseworx used the actual floor plan of the place she used to work as the basis for the in-world location. It is one of those small personal details that got quietly embedded into one of the biggest animated series on the internet, and most people watching had no idea. Around 2010 and 2011, Gooseworx opened a DeviantArt account and a YouTube channel at roughly the same time, and her early posts were experiments in drawing and music, including a remix of Pineapple Rag by Scott Joplin that went mostly unnoticed. DeviantArt turned out to be important for a different reason, because it was there that she first connected with another animator named Zurl, who would later create the series Monkey Wrench and would eventually animate a segment of Little Runmo years down the line. In 2011, she launched a web series called EVTV Weather alongside a collaborator named Evan Alderette, and that partnership turned out to be one of the most important creative relationships of her career. Alderette would go on to co-compose music with her on almost every major project she worked on, from Has-Been Hotel to the amazing Digital Circus. By August 2012, she had also registered on Newgrounds, a platform that gave her access to a wider community of independent animators and expanded her visibility beyond what she had on YouTube. A year later, in 2013, she published music connected to BattleBlock Theater, which was her first documented work composing for a game. In September 2015, Toby Fox released Undertale, and the effect it had on Gooseworx's career was immediate and significant. She started creating orchestral arrangements of songs from the game, and those covers accumulated millions of views in a way that none of her previous work had managed. Undertale effectively introduced her to a massive audience for the first time, and it demonstrated something important. She could compose music at a professional level, and people would seek it out specifically because of her name. By 2017, she had released Spookworks, her first original album, and in 2018, she compiled her Undertale arrangements into a full release called Gooseworx, Undertale Covers, which remains one of her most recognized catalogs. The Undertale era was the moment when she stopped being someone who wanted to make it and started being someone who was actively building toward it, with an audience that was growing and a collaborator in Evan Alderette, with whom she was developing a real creative shorthand. In March 2016, While still riding the wave of the Undertale covers, Gooseworx contributed her first documented piece of music to the Has-Been Hotel universe when she composed the theme for the character Angel Dust, titled Slutty Spider Polka Pop, which was published on the channel of Vivienne Medrano, known online as Vivzy Pop. This was the beginning of a creative relationship that would define a large chunk of the next several years of her career. On October 28, 2019, the pilot of Has-Been Hotel was released, and Gooseworx had co-composed the music alongside Evan Alderett and Thomas Ryan. The pilot was a massive event for independent animation on YouTube, and it positioned Gooseworx as a composer of serious standing in that world. Shortly after, she also worked on the pilot of Hell of a Boss, composing music alongside The Living Tombstone, designing the animatronics for the Lululand episode, and creating the conceptual designs for the characters Lyle Lipton and Loopty Goopty, though those were finalized by another artist. She has acknowledged publicly that she forgot to draw those characters as demons because of problems she was having with alcohol at the time, which is one of the more candid things she has said about that period. By the time the first full season of Has-Been Hotel arrived on Prime Video in January 2024, she had composed the entire original score alongside Alderett, representing the largest scale project she had worked on as a composer for someone else's creation. When the second season arrived in October 2025, she was no longer attached, having been replaced by Brian Sadler because the demands of the amazing Digital Circus made it impossible to do both. While all of the collaborative work was happening, Gooseworx was also steadily developing a creative universe of her own that most people who discovered her through Digital Circus have probably never explored. It starts with the Spookworks album in 2017, which was a collection of original music that showed her compositional voice outside of any franchise, and it extends through a series of animated short films and projects that share a very specific aesthetic, bright and playful on the outside with something genuinely unsettling underneath. In January 2019, she began publishing Horde of Heroes on DeviantArt, a fantasy webcomic that she wrote and drew entirely herself, and which remains her longest solo written work. Also in 2019, she released Dyslexic Lemons, another album. Starting in 2020, she launched the anthology series The Pink City, which brought together short films including Elaine the Bounty Hunter, Elaine Gets Adopted, Dento Takes the Stairs, Ghost of the Year, and The Darley Boxman Show. In 2021, she added Blue_Channel, Thalassin, to her catalog, a fake television commercial for a medication that produces emotions that do not exist, which went viral quickly and marked her entry into the genre of analog horror. Looking at all of these projects together, what you see is the creative DNA that would eventually become the amazing Digital Circus, already fully formed. Stories where the surface is colorful and comedic and the deeper layer is disturbing. Worlds with internal rules that break in unexpected ways, and a consistent interest in characters confronting something they cannot fully understand. She was building toward TADC for years without necessarily knowing that was where she was headed. On November 12, 2019, Gooseworx released Little Runmo, a short animated film of approximately 12 minutes about a video game character who discovers the hidden rules of the world he lives in. The film exploded in a way that none of her previous projects had, eventually surpassing 60 million views and becoming the most watched piece of content she had ever made, which she celebrated on Twitter at the time because it had even surpassed her Undertale covers. Zurl, the animator she had first met on DeviantArt years earlier, contributed a segment to the film. Little Runmo established her visual signature definitively. It had everything that would later define the amazing Digital Circus, a vibrant cartoon aesthetic, a story that starts as something fun and gradually reveals a genuinely dark premise and a specific kind of emotional intelligence underneath all the chaos. It was also the project that put her directly in front of the people who would change the next chapter of her career entirely. Following the success of Little Runmo, Kevin Lerdwichagel, the co-director of Glitch Productions, reached out to Gooseworx about developing an animated series. The first meeting did not immediately produce a winner because Gooseworx came in with 3 different concepts, all of them in 2D, and Glitch was not able to produce them in that format. That could have been the end of the conversation, but instead of walking away, she went back and spent approximately 2 weeks developing a 4th idea from scratch, this time building it around 3D animation from the very beginning. That 4th idea was a group of humans trapped inside a digital world run by an AI, inspired loosely by the 1967 short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream by Harlan Ellison, and by the specific aesthetic of computer-generated imagery from the 1990s. Glitch said yes. Pre-production began formally around mid-2022, and one of the most watched animated series in the history of YouTube was quietly starting to exist. On January 23, 2023, Glitch Productions published the first teaser for the amazing Digital Circus on social media, revealing 7 main characters. Over the following months, additional teasers appeared, and the official trailer dropped on September 22nd. On October 13th, 2023, a Friday the 13th, the pilot was published on Glitch's YouTube channel. What Gooseworx put into that pilot as a single creator is genuinely staggering. She wrote it, directed it, designed the characters, composed the music alongside Evan Alderett, and also provided the voices for 2 characters, Bubble and the Moon. Her sister Peyton Goodwin voiced the Sun. The show's aesthetic drew on 90s CGI, the emotional structure came from Harlan Ellison, and the specific details, like Ragata's fear, came from Gooseworx's own life. Her irrational terror of centipedes was the direct inspiration. The pilot surpassed 20 million views in the first week, 73 million in the first 2 weeks, 100 million in under 4 weeks, and 150 million by late November 2023. By February 2024, it had crossed 270 million. By June 2026, it was sitting at approximately 441 million views, making it the most watched independent animation pilot in the history of YouTube. In November 2023, Glitch confirmed there would be more, and by February 2024, a full 9-episode season had been officially announced. Episode 2, Candy Carrier Chaos, arrived on May 3, 2024, and surpassed 30 million views the day after its release, eventually accumulating more than 121 million by September of that year. In September 2024, Glitch announced that TADC would be coming to Netflix, and on October 4, 2024, alongside the release of Episode 3, the first 3 episodes became available on the platform. In the first 2 weeks of its Netflix run, the series entered the global top 5 for most watched shows and reached the top 3 of the TV category in its opening week. The franchise grew beyond the screen in every direction. Merchandise that funded a significant portion of production, a fandom that generated more theory content and fan art than almost anything else in the independent animation space, and a level of global visibility that turned a project Gooseworx had developed in about 2 weeks into a cultural touchpoint recognized far outside the world of animation. A manga adaptation began publication in Koro Koro Comic in October 2024. Before the theatrical premiere in 2026, the series had surpassed 1 billion total views across YouTube, a number that places it an extraordinary company regardless of format. What the numbers do not show is what was happening on the other side of them. The bigger the amazing Digital Circus became, the less freedom Gooseworx had to do anything else. She had to leave Hazbin Hotel, handing her role as composer to Brian Sadler before the second season because the demands of TADC made it impossible to manage both. Horde of Heroes, her webcomic, went into indefinite hiatus. The Pink City projects she had been building quietly for years were put on hold. Everything that had defined her creative identity before 2023 was essentially paused in service of a series that had grown far beyond what any single person could have anticipated or fully prepared for. She was the sole writer across 9 episodes, juggling creative direction, character design, music composition, and the administrative weight of managing multiple departments simultaneously, all while being Glitch's second creator-driven show, with the built-in pressure that came with following a studio that had never done this at that scale before. In a Q&A she later gave on Tumblr, she acknowledged that writing and directing 9 episodes basically killed her, and that she would have needed more writers and co-directors to do the series justice. The miracle, as she put it, was that she was even allowed to make episode 9 as long as it was. In the months leading up to the theatrical release, 2 separate controversies emerged that affected the show and the people connected to it. A 2019 livestream resurfaced featuring Michael Kovac and Ashley Nichols, the voice actors for Jax and Zubul, in which both of them used a substitute for a racial slur repeatedly in a way the community found difficult to look past. Both actors responded publicly and apologized. Separately, old tweets from Gooseworx also began circulating and generating criticism. These situations opened a genuine debate about accountability and about how fans process the separation between a creative work they love and the people who made it. Neither situation defined Gooseworx's career, but they added to the weight of an already difficult period, arriving in the weeks immediately before the most important release of her professional life. On April 10th, 2026, Glitch and Fathom Entertainment announced that the finale of the amazing Digital Circus would receive a theatrical release. The last act would combine Episode 8 with a new hour-long Episode 9 titled Remember, for a total runtime of 93 minutes. Pre-sales opened the same day and broke the all-time Fathom record, surpassing $7.5 million before the first screening. The film opened in theaters on June 4, 2026, and the opening Thursday alone generated $7.86 million in the United States, setting another Fathom record. The opening weekend across the globe brought in $36.6 million, with $12.7 million in Europe, $12.7 million in the United States, $2.1 million in Australia and New Zealand, and $1.2 million in Mexico. The total theatrical run closed at $38.2 million globally, making it the highest-grossing independent animated theatrical release Fathom had ever distributed. The series had already crossed 1 billion total YouTube views before the first theater screening. On June 19, 2026, the final episode of The Amazing Digital Circus was published on YouTube and Netflix. With that upload, a series that had begun with a single pilot on a Friday the 13th in October 2023 came to its official end across 9 episodes, 3 years, and an audience that stretched across every continent. And it was around this time that the statement from the intro of this video came. After the theatrical premiere, following a leak that had put the entire film online before a single official screening had taken place, and after years of carrying the weight of everything described in the chapters above, Gooseworx wrote on Bluesky that the series had become way more trouble than it was worth, that it had gotten too much bigger than her, and that she could no longer keep her heart in it. Coming from a person who started this journey making remixes on YouTube while working McDonald's shifts, the statement hit differently once you know the whole story. It was not a complaint. It was exhaustion. It was someone who had put an enormous amount of herself into something and had given it everything she had left. After June 19th, Gooseworx stated her intention to return to the projects she had put on hold to make TADC possible. That includes Horde of Heroes, the webcomic she started in 2019 and had to leave behind. It includes whatever comes next musically, creatively, and personally for someone who has spent the past 3 years as the most visible independent animation creator on the internet. What Gooseworx leaves behind with The Amazing Digital Circus is something that independent animation had not produced before at this scale. A series built almost entirely by one person, starting from a 2-week creative sprint pitched to a studio that believed in it, growing into a global phenomenon with a theatrical run, a Netflix deal, a manga, merchandise on 6 continents, and a fandom that will probably be theorizing about its lore for years to come. She went from making Undertale covers in the corner of the internet to creating the most watched independent animation pilot in the history of YouTube. That journey took about a decade, cost her more than she probably expected, and produced something that genuinely changed what people believed was possible in this space. Whatever she builds next, she is building it from that foundation. And that is a pretty remarkable place to start. If you made it to the end of this video, drop a comment with your favorite era of her career and which project you hope she picks back up first. See you in the next one.